Hello, I'm Mark Baer. Welcome to the Joe Cupcake Chronicles. What is the Joe Cupcake Chronicles, you might ask? Well, it's 6 hours long, broken into 5 episodes. Who is going to watch a 6-hour movie that is basically an unfurling collage full of cognitive dissonance, where the words and the images don't mix, and the stories, even though there's a story, don't go in any particular order? Well, I have visualized this playing in a museum on a fairly large screen, running on a continuous loop, 2 or 3 people comfortably seated on a bench, and maybe the one guy who's the guard in the corner. He's the one guy that has to watch this over and over. And over a few days, having seen the piece a few times, it will start having an effect upon him or her. Well, that's the vision. It turns out that maybe that's not what's going to happen. So here we are breaking it into 15 parts, 20 minutes. I realized that while I showed this to people here in this room, and I was able to lure them here with and get them into various stages of intoxication, that I could usually hold their attention for about 20-some minutes, which is about the length of one of these segments. So I'm hoping that this has the same effect upon you. Maybe this is the perfect portion. Sex, God, guilt, art, those are Joe's themes. Guilt at being such a limited individual, wanting to achieve more, wanting to be better. He is the existential everyman, imperfect everyman, wanting to experience enlightenment. Sex, well, that goes without saying. It's all about mojo. It's all about, if you want to create forever, if you want to be Picasso, you gotta have mojo. Art. This is an art conversation. It's art referenced. And the joy of doing something is not that you get to see your own limitations so much, which are manifestly obvious, but that you get to hang out with your betters. This is inspired by Proust, who was, if nothing else, long, but also happened to stumble upon a way to tell a story through involuntary memory when he tripped upon some paving stones and was brought back to another time, and it made his whole life available to me. It was a fabulous way of storytelling. Charlie Chaplin, who wandered into a back room on Mack Sennett's lot one day and found this costume. He didn't think this out. He just found this costume of the little tramp. He found this hat, this coat, came out, and he had found the perfect vehicle for himself. Joe Cupcake is perfect for me. I don't have to tell stories in any particular order. I can work with many colors and shades to get at some kind of truth that is difficult to tell. And it's third-person autobiography, except that Joe gets to do more things than I do. And it's about the nature of cubism. This is a cubist look at reality. So, without further ado, Joe Cupcake. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word baby was Ooga Booga, or woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Joe Cupcake. A guilty conscience needs to confess. A work of art is a confession. It was Joe's observation that during most of life, nothing was happening. And while nothing was happening, everything was happening. But Joe found his personal patch of nothing, delightful as it was to him, difficult to share. All the same, Joe wanted to talk and wanted the illusion that he was talking to someone outside of himself. He wanted words and images to meld together, like dancing through the wall of a waterfall. Sex, God, art, guilt. That's what Joe thought about. He should have been thinking about money. Maybe he could sell ad space on his forehead. He took delight finding a vein of gold in a fragment of scrap. Joe valued what others did not. The Church of Art would be his salvation. Beauty was everywhere when the light was right, and Joe loved being alive. He loved breathing. God was breath. There was spirit in each exhalation. God in, God out, unless his nose was stuffed. Joe's story was to include everything, even a portal of blue breaking through the clouds above the mountain, like a square in a Mark Rothko painting. Asked how close one should stand to his pictures, Rothko said, about 18 inches. Joe didn't need to be that close, but he liked to watch. He liked to peep through peepholes. He didn't want people looking at him. He disdained attention. He'd learned to blend, to be invisible. Joe thought he should have been more embarrassed than he was. On the other hand, Joe wanted to help others and do well whenever he could. He'd give a bum a buck, and he'd open doors for old ladies. He didn't scream in traffic or throw garbage out his window. He paid his taxes, and he bathed regularly. He could be your neighbor. Joe took copious notes, thoughts, observations, aspirations, even his recipe for glazed asparagus. He jotted all this into his journal. Everything went in. All the papers on his desk, shopping lists, and phone messages. He thought this would give a truer reading. He found some crumpled notes in a jacket and tossed them onto his desk. One read, "I like a girl who tests her lipstick on her sleeve." Another read, "Krishna on a billboard, a new god for the everyday girl, kissy pink." Then there were scrawled addresses, Paloma and Speedway, Pacific and Brooks, Pico east of Bundy, crime scenes, secret love nests. Where had Joe been? A pound of flesh is nothing when it is a bite at a time. And nothing wrong with him that $100 bill, some oyster crackers, and a breath mint couldn't fix. So proclaimed Joe's latest interior minister of sinister. Joe was wired like the new man everywhere, full of bogus dreams, manufactured visions, and erroneous ideas. The new gods didn't rise up from the soil or bolt down from the heavens. They came out of his TV. But when his mind was overwhelmed with static, he held a finger to his belly button and waited for direct revelation. The message came. Don't judge what has meaning and what does not. It's all God. Embrace. Thought Joe. Maybe, and maybe not. But the light never abandoned him. In Las Vegas, Joe was impressed with the electric monitors that were ubiquitous. At the front desk of the MGM Grand, the video showed everything happening in the hotel. In restaurants, video screens were used for design. On the street, it was like Blade Runner. Joe had a revelation, an epiphany. He saw a new metaphor for his mind. Before, it was a squirrel on a treadmill. Now he set about retrofitting his mental interior with video screens. Inside his new mind, It was action all the time, dancing ladies and men in tuxedos doing magic tricks. It was frantic, kaleidoscopic, chaotic, a choir of voices under an endless stream of images. There was Joe of his body, and there was Joe the size of a peanut, like the Wizard of Oz, running the command center. And there were bloated bureaucrats behind little Joe, doing their best to keep him on the straight and narrow, while their underlings scooted about with competing agendas, as if on the floor of some alien stock exchange. Their uniforms were pressed, tailored, sleek. Their halogen eyes lit up, and when agitated, their heads swiveled in circles. Despite Joe's overlords and their minions, it wasn't all business in the command center. Far from it. Joe liked things jovial, and there was often a parade of scantily clad showgirls streaking across the screens, all colors of the spectrum, all shapes and sizes, some from this planet, some from that. But who is Joe Cupcake? Hard-boiled existentialist? Soft-boiled seeker? Philip Marlowe high on Vishnu? A random citizen with a head stuffed with stuff? A simple man yearning for a simpler time when his head was only stuffed with straw? And what would happen if Joe Cupcake couldn't take it anymore? If he reached the last straw, so to speak? Joe, like every sensitive person, wanted to live at the threshold of beauty. But what was the emotional pitch required to tune into that channel and keep it from fuzzing out? Joe looked around. You didn't have to be a prophet to proclaim the end was at hand. His country was in a mess, and many of his friends were out of work, broke, on the ledge, contemplating jumping. Smoking was up, and mental hygiene was at a premium. Joe wondered what if all the men in his town had the same name. Every morning, when he opened the paper, he could read how he had cured a new disease, committed murder, been born and died. Would he and all the other Joe Cupcakes harmonize as a unit? Would they get over their differences and find their individual true natures? Or would he shirk his civic duties knowing there was another Joe Cupcake to pick up the slack? What if their savior had the same name? A bobble-headed Joe on every dash. Every Joe worthy of an Illuminati nimbus, glowing, read in the dark. Praise the Lord and pass the cupcake. Praise the cupcake, pass the Lord. More to the point, would another Joe Cupcake pay off his credit card debt? Joe Cupcake, every man, fungible Joe, part of the larger whole. Maybe this was a good thing. He'd be less important, sure, but he'd also be more important. When he thought about only himself like he usually did, he'd now be thinking of everybody. He would be ethnically diverse, multicultural, gay and straight all at once, more connected to more things. That would be good, or could be good. Just the notion of his new magnanimity buoyed Joe's spirits. He was better already. But
his imagination sometimes got the better of him. At the park, Joe noticed dragonflies flitting about. His first thought was they weren't real, they were mechanical, taking pictures and mining information. Joe feared he was the target of some new marketing campaign. And just what he needed, more shit he didn't need. He read too much into things, and probably in the wrong language. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was Ooga Booga. Yeah, that's how Joe heard it. Or was that woulda, coulda, shoulda? To Joe, believing and not believing was not a contradiction. It was the only way life made sense. And sure, Joe had heard some good news about the meek, but he didn't read the Hebrew, the Aramaic, or the Greek. And he didn't trust much that anyone he knew said. Did he scrawl on a wall? A scrawl on a wall can be a powerful action, a crude but effective way to share information. He wanted to express the wrath of his inner Isaiah. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. He wanted to do something, wanted his voice heard over the roar of electronic detritus, wanted to scribble in charcoal. Woe unto them that call darkness light and light darkness. And most of all, he wanted to believe his gyrations would gyrate a new generation. Morally, he was a man running in his sleep, running, but his legs not moving. And when he tried to shout, no sound came out, but scream he must. He heard, Joe, 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 1, 2, 3, go. And words sprayed out. In a hysterical dance, a dervish, winds gusted, branches snapped, leaves swirled. There was turmoil and tumult. Words sprayed everywhere. Some with meaning, most not, most just jibber-jabber. And all the while, Joe waited for something, perhaps a single transmission.
Joe's angst was the angst of his tricky times, and yet he was singular as a snowflake. He was alike and different all at once, and the thought of snow made him glad he lived in California. Joe was facing the blue Pacific at the end of the continent. The waves crashed, and Joe heard music in the waves, then voices, then a roar of terror. It seems we have all the time in the world, and then it seems all our time is spent. It goes on like this. 1 second, everything has meaning. Poof, the moment passes, and nothing has meaning. On a good day, there is the illusion that we matter, that everything matters enormously. And then, thought Joe resignedly, we matter not. That's life. That's what people say. Riding high in April, shot down in May. Oh yeah. Well, Joe had recently undergone a mental makeover. The results weren't impressive. However, the one thing he had learned, avoid the void. Never submit to the pit. Pits are for plums. Stay on the sunny side of life. It might be hopeless, meaningless, and futile, but you still need a cookie jar to hold your cookies. Joe the New Man, a compilation of ones and zeros. Was he a 1 or was he a 0? That was his struggle. And what about Buddha? 1 or 0? What was better? Nietzsche. Definitely a 1. Joe's ex-wife says he cares about no one but himself. She lists his shortcomings and failures. Joe tells her he's glad he doesn't have to live with the version of himself who lives in her head. But is the Joe in his head truer than the Joe in her head? Joe jotted on a napkin, we must have compassion for ourselves and for others. The cynical man will have a cynical result. How we approach life is everything. Joe approached cautiously. He looked normal enough, even gave off a ruddy glow of joie de vivre. He could talk about sports and the weather and the slumping economy with the best of them. His socks matched, and looking down, he confirmed that both shoes were the same color. He couldn't boast of this every day, but most days he got it together. His name never appeared in the police blotter. he didn't run a Ponzi scheme. But lately, he'd been disturbed by his dreams. Petty crimes all night in his sleep. Sometimes Joe was the witness, sometimes the victim, sometimes the villain. Recently, there was a woman trapped in a mirror. The mirror shattered. She hadn't seen it coming. Her image was multiplied in the shards on the floor. As he fled the room, her expression of shock and slow understanding of betrayal was the last thing he saw. And last night, a clandestinely buried body, the wife of a friend. He carried the knowledge of the crime and kept mum. They suspected him, but couldn't prove anything. Could he live with this secret? The guilt was overwhelming. Joe felt apprehension, paranoia. Calls didn't get returned. Emails went unanswered. Had Joe become a pest and undesirable? Had some secret gotten out? Had some unpleasant rumor been whispered? Was this gossip true? But who cared enough to obsess on him? Everyone was busy getting old. Joe's phone book was full of dead friends. Life is brief. We flitter, we fall. But he told himself this was the vital time. The best had not passed. The past was prelude. And whatever he had prepared for was about to unfold. Joe told himself a lot of things. Joe wanted to believe, and so he did. He was looking for simple expressions, for complex thoughts. Joe felt like a man holding the door open to the next world, while glancing back for a last time. Portals lock, portals open. The high and the pure pass through the gateway into a pocket of silence where the music of the spheres can be heard. Joe wanted to transcend. Higher consciousness is a good thing, no? Awake, eyes open, alert with kindness. He had been reading the Dalai Lama's Guide to Happiness. Compassion is the great secret to happiness. Embrace your enemies. See things from a different perspective. Plus, study and scholarship. Imagine the suffering of others. Get beyond the romantic notion of love. And yet Joe knew he wouldn't make any real progress until he started taking the doggy poop bags with him on his walks. He vowed he would try harder.
Find your own truth and live it. But so many questions. Dreams, where do they start? Where do they end? The visible, the invisible. What to trust more? But if truth were simple and our stories easy to tell, there would be no need for art.
It's all poetry, declared Joe, scanning the crawl on cable news. A man shot 12 nails into his skull with a nail gun and survived. Joe saw the x-rays. The man told the hospital it was an accident, but later admitted he was on meth and tried to commit suicide. In another story, a man was arrested for trying to sell his daughter. The mother had already skipped the country. The man asked for $7,000. He wanted to remodel his house. This was followed by a story about angels. How we are not angels, but some of us can hear their wings beating. Joe wondered about their feathers when they molted. Would their wings be dirty or not? He was in a car dealership trying to track down info on his extended warranty. It was 11:45 on a Wednesday morning, not the usual hour for poetry. The light was harsh, the coffee was bitter. The chocolate donut with sprinkles did not satisfy. A tall girl, blonde, not real blonde, but blonde enough, with tight jeans that showed some midriff, shifted his attention away from his donut. What would we talk about, thought Joe? Angels? In a perfect world, they wouldn't have to talk, just ah, ooh. What else would there be to say? This mirrored his feelings about God. What was there to say? You either have the feeling or you don't. Like Nietzsche, Joe couldn't believe in a God who needed to be constantly praised. The poetry of the humdrum, this was where Joe lived most of the time. Joe liked his poetry stripped down and embraced the flat morning light, the everyday. Must the poet be so damn poetic? Is the mundane not sacred? The poetry in the New Yorker left him unsatisfied, even Philip Levine. Subtle wordplay, but before he could complete his thought, he began to worry about the Broncos, 2-1. They looked good on Monday night, but the season opener in Miami was a disaster. He scanned the paper and worried about the mess in Zimbabwe, but not in a constructive way that would lead to action on his part, no. Joe thought of the world's plight in the same way he thought about toothpaste or life insurance or dog food or Kinko's. Images that fluttered across his TV screen. Somehow, all the images were equal. He flashed on the Sufi shaker from Alabama that he met last Sunday. No, she didn't trust seekers either. He feared his best friend's cancer had returned. The thought woke him in the night. Joe tried not to think about that. Me. His concerns about his friend shifted back to himself. How would it affect him? Were others as self-absorbed? Joe looked at his hands and thought of Rodin. No one explored a body like Rodin, and women loved him. Yes, said Joe. Yes, the model would answer, yearning to be immortalized in smooth, cool marble by Joe Cupcake with the hands of Rodin. Back to the girl in the tight jeans buying a Coke in the vending machine. We wouldn't discuss sculpture, thought Joe. We just, what? Have a moment while our cars got worked on? Don't know and would never find out. They announced Joe's car was ready, so left and another left until he hit the interstate, heading home. A chair had fallen out of a pickup truck and was perched in the center lane of the 101. Cars swerved around the chair. Joe hadn't seen the chair fall out of the truck, but his mind made this logical leap of cause and effect. On the other hand, maybe the chair belonged there. Maybe somebody came out and sat in the chair every afternoon at 3 o'clock. That was a brave soul, thought Joe. That was a person of considerable faith.